Hello everyone and welcome to round 3 of Qatar Masters. Yesterday we had one of the greatest games played in I don't know how long, because it's a classical game, and Alisher Suleymanov, Grandmaster from Kazakhstan, defeated Magnus Carlsen in the greatest possible style. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's my previous video. And now another day, Magnus faces another international master. This time, the international master Muthaiah from India. And well, let's see how Magnus recuperates after losing a classical game, and can he do something in this one with the white pieces. So he opted for e4. We have e5 by Muthaiah, knight to f3, knight to f6. He went for the Petrov defense, and Magnus goes for knight captures on e5, the main line. d6 chasing away the knight, knight to f3, and knight captures on e4, the classical variation. d3, knight to f6, and now pawn to d4. We have g6, and now bishop to d3. So this is a somewhat rarer with the g6 than just advancing the pawn to d5, but also there are some games, bishop g7, both players castle, and here pawn to h3. And there are some games where c5 and knight to c6 were played, but here we have pawn to b6, and it is now as of move 9 that we have a completely new game. So of course Muthaiah wants to fianchetto his light square bishop and put it on this long diagonal. We have pawn to c4 by Magnus, bishop to b7, and knight to c3. We have rook to e8, and now bishop to e3. Knight b to d7, and now rook to e1. We have pawn to h6, and now pawn to d5. So Magnus makes the first change in the position. He advances the pawn to d5, grabs more squares here. The knight might have some d4 ideas, or maybe even c6 in the future, but he also gives up the c5 square for Muthaiah's knight. So he goes knight to c5, bishop to c2, and now pawn to c6. Challenging Magnus's strong center. We have queen to d2, putting pressure on the h6 pawn, and here we have a very nice capture fest. C captures on d5, c captures on d5, and now knight f to e4, attacking the queen on d2. So Magnus trades on e4, again the queen is attacked, bishop captures on e4, rook captures, and bishop captures on h6. So Magnus wins a pawn, but he will also have to give back the d5 pawn. So rook captures on e1, rook captures on e1, or you could capture with the queen, but that doesn't really work, as then bishop captures on h6 happens. So rook captures on e1, bishop captures on h6, queen captures, and now bishop captures on d5. So some 6 moves of pure capturing, and now we have this position where it's Magnus's knight against the Muthaiah's bishop, and it's 5 pawns each. 2 pawn islands for Magnus and 3 pawn islands for Muthaiah. And okay, 2 pawn islands is pretty much always better than 3 pawn islands, but here it's the passed d pawn, and you do have the bishop to help with the advancement of the pawn. So it's okay to be both white and black here. We have knight to d4. Magnus needs to move the bishop. If he wants to play something like this and try to organize an attack against the d6 pawn, of course Muthaiah just trades here, and then it's really hard to prove anything here. The passed pawn might even be a strength here. So after bishop captures on d5, knight to d4, of course you have to avoid the trade, and now you can't really capture on a2. It's a poison pawn. It's as poison as they come. So if you capture here, then knight to c6 attacks the queen, and knight to e7 check ends the game. There's no defense against this. Whatever you do, you play queen f6, knight e7 check. No squares for the black king. You will have to give up your queen. So instead, queen to f6 is played, now putting pressure on the knight here, and queen back to d2, defending the knight. But the pawn is still poisoned, not for the reason that we've just explained, but the bishop will be trapped after b3. And after a5, you cannot capture it with the queen, as the queen on f6 is attacking the knight here, but you will go after it with the rook. And now after bishop captures on b3, knight captures and defends the rook on a1, and it doesn't matter if you play a4, because a captures on b3 is not a threat, as the rook on a8 would hang. So that's the idea behind why bishop captures on a2 does not work now. But rook to c8, and now bishop captures on a2 has become a threat, so Magnus plays pawn to a3. We have pawn to e6, and now rook to e3. We have king to g7, and now knight to e2. Okay, bishop to c4, clearing the path for the passed d pawn to be pushed forward. Knight to g3. We have pawn to d5, stopping the knight from coming to e4, and pawn to b3 now. Here you could also maybe decide to go for rook to f3, attack the queen first, because after b3 and bishop b5, now if you play rook to f3, you also have to worry about queen to a1 check, which was impossible with the pawn on b2. But still, you could play it. To give you a fine line, if rook f3, queen a1 check, and king to h2, you still cannot touch the pawn. This is truly a poison pawn, because now knight h5 check and black resigns. There's no escaping. If you go kingside, then rook captures on f7. If you go queenside, then queen to h6 will end the game. And of course, if you capture the knight, then queen to d4 check, king to g8, and now queen to f6. Of course, with the idea of queen captures on f7, and once you defend that, just rook to g3 check, king to h7, and queen to g7 checkmate. This is only one of the lines, but all of them end really bad for black. So while you can play it, you cannot go after the pawn. So maybe your queen is better suited on f6. So here we have pawn to a4, and now bishop to d7, knight to e2. Magnus has to figure out how to properly position the knight. The d4 square is very, very nice. As it's a dark square, your opponent has a light square bishop, so the knight will be very strong here. However, you don't expect to win a game with knight on d4. We all know that to win games, the knight has to go to e5. Okay, bishop to e6, we have knight to d4, and now pawn to a5. We have king to h2, and now queen to f4 with check. Pawn to g3, Magnus weakens his king side a little bit, but it is necessary if he wants to continue the game. Queen to f6, and now king to g2. We have bishop to d7, now even pawn to g4. Rook to e8, offering a rook trade, and Magnus goes for it. Rook captures on e8, bishop captures on e8, and now queen to e3. And how do you defend here? Bishop to d7 was played, but now knight to f3. And it looks a bit dangerous to allow the bishop to come to this diagonal, but Magnus has it all worked out. Bishop to c6. And now, of course, he cannot go after the b6 pawn. If he captures the b6 pawn, then just pawn to d4, and he can resign. There's no defense here. You cannot defend the knight. And on the other hand, if he goes something like knight to e5, which is the square that you want to bring the knight to, then d4 check again wins the game as you hang your queen here. So what he can do is play pawn to g5, attack the black queen, and once the queen moves, now play queen captures on b6. So that's now it's very much different, because after pawn to d4, he just plays king to f1. This was the key move to find. You can now unpin, because then now it's the black queen that is hanging. So we have king to g8, queen captures on d4, Magnus grabs another pawn, and now queen to e6. Here, interestingly, queen to e7 is still a draw. And when I say a draw, it is possible to hold this with the absolute best moves, because now you prevent the knight from going anywhere, as the g5 pawn would be lost. To give you an example, if knight to e5, queen captures on g5, and if knight captures on c6, there's queen to c1 check, picking up the knight. So you cannot really activate the knight even by giving up the g5 pawn. But after queen to e6, going after the h3 pawn, which seems like a better idea for black, Magnus just plays knight to e5, and he shows that, nope, this is not a good idea for black. So now you've committed, you have to go for it. Muthaiah goes queen captures on h3, king to e1, and now queen to h1 with check. King d2 and bishop to f3, going after queen to d1, but now the position is completely winning for Magnus. If you guys can help him win it, he needs one move. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the absolute best move while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding all the correct moves with the king. You have to calculate queen to d1 properly. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen to ace. I am only joking. It is, of course, knight to d7. That's the move that Magnus played, and now the position is completely winning. Point being that after queen to d1 check, which was played in the game, king to e3, you can't really trade queens. Queen to e2 check doesn't help. If you go king to f4 now, what do? There are no checks. Knight to f6 check is coming. Also, the queen can't really move with the bishop being here. And if you play bishop to b7, just queen to e3, and now the king and pawn endgame is winning. And also, this pawn is on a dark square. So even if you go into a knight versus bishop, the knight will very easily outmaneuver the bishop, capture on a5, and then the queenside pawns are winning. So this is out of the question. Another thing, of course, after king to e3, you could capture the queen, but it's same thing. King captures, and you just gobble up this pawn and easily win the game. So after king to e3, queen captures on b3 was played, but now king to f4, and again, the queen cannot move, the bishop here is a problem. And if you go for queen to d1 now, queen to d1 sort of the maybe most resilient way for black to play this. There's knight to f6 check, and after king to f8, queen to e5, threatening checkmate, and that's it. You either get checkmated with queen to e8, queen to g8 checkmate, or you move the king, deliver some check, and you lose the bishop. Or if you try to save the bishop and prevent checkmate, then it's a matter of queen to b8 check, and after king to e7, now queen to c7 check. You block with the bishop, but now you just trade everything. Captures, 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 and captures, and after king to e5, it's equal material, but of course completely winning as the white king is too active. King e7, you get opposition, but now king d5, and you will simply gobble up this pawn and win the game. So after after king to f4, bishop to c6 was played, but now Magnus just has a forced checkmate in 7, which he plays, and of course you guys see it as well, as we have the queen and the knight ready to jump to f6. So knight to f6 check, king to g7, and knight to h5, delivering a double check. So any king h7 or king to g8 will be met with queen to g7 checkmate. So king to f8, but now queen to d6 check, and now of course if you go here, then it's checkmate with knight to g7. You don't have to take the bishop. So king to g8 was played, but now just queen to d8 with check, and it was in this position on move 53 that Muthaiah resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. 2 more moves will be played, of course, if you don't want to play a silly move like bishop to e8. So king to h7, and now, of course, knight to f6 check. Only move king to g7, and queen to g8 will be checkmate. So Magnus bounces back. He grabs a full point against Muthaiah, and Magnus's nemesis from the previous round, Alisher Suleymanov, also lost his game today. So we're not gonna have. I thought it'd be really cool if he just, crushed Magnus and then he ends up winning the tournament. But even though that might still happen, it will not be as clean as, some of you thought that it would be. And if you guys are interested in some other results from this round, I don't think all the games have finished, but some of them have. So I'm going to spoil it a little bit now. So Magnus won on board 1. Vokidov drew Nakamura on board 2. Anish Giri drew Aditya Mittal on board 3. Then Arjun defeated Rasulov on board 4. Sindarov defeated Kaidanov on board 5, and Narayanan defeated Suleymanov. Yeah, we already said that, on board 6, and so on and so on. So currently, there are 5 players on 100%. On full 3 points, it's Arjun Ergesi, Jaukir Sindarov, Narayanan, Rinat Yumabayev, and Robi Kevelishvili. So those are the top 5 currently. With on 100%, then Hikaru on 2.5 out of 3, and so on and so on. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Nicely bouncing back 2 games in a row against an international master, not in an everyday occurrence for Magnus Carlsen. But if you lose the game, you have to fight your way back to the top. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank No Need to Mention Me in the video, Mirza's 3-peat, Nathan Gibson, Nagarjuna Pongoti, and David William Grasberger for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And you still have a chance to play against Alireza Firuzja. Everything you need to know is in the link in the description below. First thing you will see. See you soon.